A very good morning to all those present. We request the panelists to take their seats on the stage. We welcome the dignitaries for the second and final day of the 2017 annual meeting of the International Association of Law Schools. The third plenary session on implementing change, IALS as a networked improvement community will be now. This session will be chaired by Francis S.L. Wong, Dean Emeritus, Soochow University, Kenneth Wang School of Law, and President of the IALS. The panel shall also include Shashikala Gurpur, Director, Symbiosis Law School Pune, Dean, Faculty of Law, SIU Pune, and Chair Representative of the International Law Study Group. Andrew Dadal, Assistant Professor, Qatar University College of Law, and Chair of the Commercial Law Study Group. Abdul Karim Abubakar Kana, Dean, Faculty of Law, Nasarawa State University of Kefi, and Chair of the Criminal Law Procedure Study Group. Valentina Smorgunova, Dean, Harrison State Pedagogical University of Russia, and Board Member of the IALS. We are indeed honored to have this panel. For further conduction of the plenary session, we hand over the proceedings to the Chair.
Welcome everyone and good morning. I'm stunned. Normally the last panel, and particularly on a Saturday of a conference, there are 3 cats and a dog out there, but this is an amazing participation. I always say, oh, we get 4.5 people. I say, where's the half come from? It's the person that walks in and out. But this is terrific, and thank you all for coming. We're looking at, if you recall the in our discussion here at the annual meeting, we focused on the doctrinal study groups. We're focused on you see me frantically looking, because they never got my bags, so I just want to let you know that. We looked at pedagogy. We've looked at how the doctrinal study groups are going to work together, this whole question of harmonization, and then also then respecting the context and the differences. And our third panel now talks about how do we implement. But I want to make something very clear right at the outset, because there was some concern when we talked about all of these things, and at the global law deans too. My God, not another set of standards. Not another set of rules. It's not the intent. And that's not the intent at all. The intent is that we, as the legal education community, we need to develop a narrative, our own narrative. The way that we're regulated, the way that we have to react to what we teach, how we teach, who we teach, has been set by somebody else. Is it completely wrong? No. They're addressing their concerns. But how about our concerns? We've not developed that perspective. The way that we address these issues is that we're reactive. And when push comes to shove, at the end of the day, we always fall back on academic freedom. So we react when things are being imposed too harshly on us. We say, oh, you're intruding into my classroom, you're intruding into my academic freedom of the way I want to do things. Well, we need to be proactive. Education itself, and in particular legal education now, we're at an existential moment. Where are we going? Technology is changing so quickly. In the first day's panel, look, your students, what you're producing is going to be replaced by a software program. See? Some of it will be. What's the value added? Because if we don't address that, somebody else will. And it's either the marketplace, the professional bar, the courts, or the Ministry of Education. Whoever is accrediting us also is being set by newspapers, magazines, and websites. The corrosiveness of ranking has affected all of us. But ranking does also have a good side in the sense that it pushes us. But is it pushing us in the right direction? Some would say yes, some would say no. At the end of the day, we need to decide for ourselves. And so we've set the foundation of what we have decided as a community, of the principles, standards, outcomes of a legal education, how we should be evaluated. And we've invited the judiciary to come in and help us. Because at the end of the day, and I call them the high priests. And so if you look upon law as the secular religion, that's the bottom line, is with the judiciary. We did not engage the professional bar in this discussion. And there are those who have come and asked, well, why not? Aren't they really important? Yes, they're very important. If we invite them in at this stage of the game, they would dominate us, because they've dominated the conversation already. If you take a look at the way that you're being regulated, what's being imposed upon you is that every one of your students are expected somehow, their aspiration should be to practice law, to be part of the law business, be a judge, a prosecutor, or a lawyer. Certainly in my school in China, that's not the case. I talked to many of our colleagues from around the world. That's not the case. It's an undergraduate education. They've majored in law. They've read the law. But they go on to do a variety of other things. Do we make them feel like they're failures? Because if they feel that way, we failed. Because we're not taking into account what their career objectives are. But these people, even though they don't go out into the formal law industry, are going to populate government, business, nonprofits, civil society, and we want to make sure that they have that sense of what is to have a legal education, to honor and revere what is the rule of law. So we need to articulate that. We need to come down and say, this is what a legal education is really about. And if you want to practice, fine. There's specialties. If you don't want to practice, you have to understand what practice is about, because that's the final formation in terms of what is going on. But if you're going to go into government, if you're going to go into business, civil society, etc., please take with you this legal education, because you are part of the process also. You will always be looked upon, as time goes on, as the person who studied law. Same as those who studied economics. Same as those who studied sociology, biology. They may not be biologists or sociologists, but whatever they do, they have a perspective. And we need to articulate what is that end result, that character formation that we're aiming at for anyone who has gone through a program of being educated in the law. The challenge now that we have is how are we going to implement all this? We have principles, ideals. You've seen that we've made our first steps in that with respect to the doctrinal study groups. And the doctrinal study groups started out with really content. What's the core? Now we're all, once again, very clever, smartest people in any room, in any meeting, because we've been educated in the law. But what do we emphasize? We'll always emphasize the differences. And what we're looking for now, at least, is a commonality. Civil law, common law, Sharia law. But what's the commonality? What's the underlayment? That we need to have our students understand, appreciate, honor, revere. That this is what law does. This is the basis of a rule of law. They become better citizens. They become educated with respect to how it all works. Because that's what the law is. It's the glue. It's the lubricant of human relations. Relations between ourselves and authority and government. Relations between ourselves. Relations between entities. It is, from my perspective at least, one of the highest creations of culture of human beings. And it's become much more important because of the changes that we've seen. And we need to react to that. But react to it how? Not just being reactive. We need to get ahead of the curve. And that's what we have done in setting down the basics and trying to reach consensus, which we have in this association among teachers of the law worldwide. How to implement study groups. Okay. Carnegie Foundation has been instrumental in looking at professional development. The prior director of the Carnegie Foundation, Lee Shulman, had the Carnegie Foundation go through a series of studies in terms of professionalization. Nursing, divinity, also the law, medicine. Their report in terms of professionalism in the law, very, very astute. Pointed out the good parts, pointed out what is lacking. At the time of that study, and this is several years ago, I don't think the questions that we're facing today were as acute. Technology has really transformed what we are doing. Tony Breck, who's the new, he's been there for a while now, at the Carnegie Foundation, and each new director of the foundation gets to, it's a great job, gets to decide what's the next big thing that they want to study. And so he said, okay, fine, now we have all these things, and we did this wonderful series of studies on developing a professional attitude and in nursing and divinity and things like that. How are we going to implement change in education? Because the basis of all of these traditional, noble professions, it comes down to how do you educate people to exhibit that? What's the character formation from knowledge, skills, and values? And so what they have pushed for the past several years now is something called a networked improvement community. And we looked at that and said, this is not a bad paradigm. We're not going to follow anything slavishly, but we're going to just throw it out. But a networked improvement community really has a purpose. It's people looking at an issue in education, this is applied here to education, setting a goal which grows from a perceived understanding of what the challenges are, and how do you get there? And I liked the philosophy of what a networked improvement community is, because it's not top-down. It's a group coming together, and that's what we hope to instill in the doctrinal study groups of colleagues, first identifying what your impact should be. What's your outcome? Working back and saying, can I achieve that? And you see the logic map, which is the Kellogg Foundation that had proposed that. And I know that in the small groups there have been some decisions, oh God, this doesn't fit, that doesn't fit. What it all is, once again, it's a tool. And that tool is to bring together then a focus in terms of a conversation. So what box does this fit in? Well, I can't pay my professors very well. Well, okay, that's an input issue, isn't it? We wanted people to pass the bar a lot. Okay, fine. That's an output. You can measure that. It's to help in that conversation so that we can put together a framework for a conversation to decide where we want to go and how can we get there. And how do you measure, most importantly, that you're getting someplace. Now, there have been many, many suggestions. We're going to hear more in terms of different modalities, different models of changing education as a whole. And I think they're great. The challenge that we face, though, is that the evidence has always been anecdotal. And it sounds good to us. Clinics, that sounds good to us, doesn't it? Give the students practical experience. It should work. But how do you measure that? Well, there are many ways, student evaluation and things like that. That's good. Let's be more precise. What's the cost? What's the input? What resources are required? you move that needle? What's the change at the end? Are there other ways to do it? Is there more cost-effective ways? I'm a low-resource institution. I can't afford to do clinics in all these areas. Are there other ways of reaching that goal? The idea of a networked improvement community is colleagues getting together, identifying what the issues are, and how do we get there, and how do we measure it, and it's iterative. This worked, this didn't work. Somebody else says, fine, I'll try that, and here are my results. Maybe if we change this, we'll get a better result. It's constant change, constant improvement. And that's the difference between the way that we're presently regulated, which means a bunch of people with authority, I'm sure with good intentions, but on a whole, the regulation has been focused on producing lawyers, saying to us, this is what you need to do. And then we would react to it. And on a whole, if we want to be accredited, then we follow it. And so that's been the mindset. So when we proposed, I see Barbara smiling because when we proposed this, and this is the end result of a series of conversations, and I remember the most difficult one was in Columbia, at one of the Americas meetings, and we had two law school deans who were just vociferously against any of this. And I said, because your mind, and we finally came down and said, because our mindset is fixed when we talk about setting some kind of a standard, some kind of a framework into the way that we're being regulated. And the conclusion that we reached at the end of that meeting was that, in some respects, we need a new vocabulary. We need to take a different approach. This is not about top-down. This is not about saying, you've got to do this or that. And that's what we talked about in terms of the harmonization and also then the differences. And institutionally, we need to have a basic understanding of what is a legal education and inculcating in our students a certain sense of the rule of law. That's a basic. But we have a diverse group in terms of a variety of different laws, different resources, etc. How do you then contextualize it locally? That's the challenge. We don't have the answer yet. But the answer has to come from us, from this community. We don't have answers, and we will not develop good answers if we just react. You got to get ahead of the curve. So, with respect to the networked improvement community, there's a variety, and there's some articles, and I think there should be a link to a basic article that Tony Breck had put out about the formation of network improvement communities, etc. We're not going to follow that slavishly. But the concept of equals, because we all teach law, we have different resources, we have different missions, but we all teach law, of equal colleagues getting together and coming up with ideas and testing those ideas and changing, because the tests say this worked, that didn't work. So we're going to turn now to our panel, and I'm going to ask Sashi, I want to start with you. And the question I have, how, and use examples from your experience, and you're very internationalized, how do we, as a community, move towards improvement in a way that is not threatening, a way that we can test hypotheses to improve? And if you can draw from your own experience in terms of your school and really in the marvelous job that you've done.
Thank you, Frank. I hope I'll be able to connect to the outcome of the group that we had yesterday as well. In our group, we had representatives from our law school, 2 representatives, 2 from our Noida sibling law school. But most important, we had an international global law schools representative and international faculty speaking in our group, aside from the dean from Australia. So all of us looked at this idea of introducing new perspectives, as gleaned from the first session on how to motivate students and how to make our pedagogy effective. One of the very important ideas that was coming in was there was a very strong argument between the two factions within the group. Almost 30% of the members were absent. Otherwise, we would have more diversity, because Indonesian representation was absent. Now, one of the most powerful ideas that came across was that millennial generation students, as we said, very net savvy. So first requirement is to filter the information. Everything on the internet cannot be used as it is. So how do you develop that sense of critical scanning of information? Second idea was that how do we use internet or e-resources as teaching resources so that students engage better. So for that, there was a very interesting innovative approach used in the Jindal Global Law School, which we also use, using the learning management system, through which pre-reading is circulated, a list of books are given, list of articles are given. But the most interesting one is creating groups on a particular module where the students will debate, and using those groups as a tool of assessment as well. So this accomplishes the mastery idea which came across in the group. So weekly discussion groups was the idea, and that was also used as a tool